Okay, folks, let's get started. How's everyone doing this evening? Good. Can you hear me okay in the back? Excellent. All right, well, welcome to the third installment of our book review of The Accommodation by Jim Schutze. If you've missed the last 2 weeks, that's okay. A lot of the stories don't necessarily build on the last, although some of them do. I'll do my best to catch you up if there are missing pieces. But tonight we're going to go through chapters 17 through 26. So, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, but as a preface, can you tell people again why it's so hard to find the book and how they could read it?
Absolutely. So, the book went out of print in the late 80s, or maybe the mid 80s. There was some pressure from certain people in the community that did not necessarily like what was in the book, so the publisher took it out of print. Jim Schutze, the author, then transferred the rights to the book to John Wiley Price, who had promised to publish it on his own dime. And once he looked at it and discovered how much it was going to cost to actually publish the book, he opted out. So the book has not been republished since the 80s. It is out of print. It's very difficult to find. If you find it on Amazon, it's usually for $400 or $500 a copy, and people actually have paid that much for it. However, if you would like to read the book and you don't have a copy of it, as Jim likes to say, there are copies of it on the internet that are being distributed not according to a publishing agreement, we'll say. I can't tell you because we're on video exactly where to find those things, but I'm sure there are many people around the room that if you ask them, might direct you to where you could find those things. So, if you haven't read the book, just ask around, you'll find it, and then you can have a look. I think this is one of the most important books about Dallas. It really does tell a story about how we got to where we are. It provides some context for the present that I think is really important, especially as a younger person. I've been in Dallas for 20 years. There were a lot of things in the city that surprised me. Why do things operate this way? Where does this heightened level of frustration come from, especially in minority communities? And then I read this book several years ago, and things became much clearer. So I think especially for young people who didn't grow up during this era, it's especially important to read these stories and figure out just why things are as messed up as they are. So, beginning here in chapter 17, and by the way, I'm going to try and make this recitation of these chapters fairly quick. One of the chapters that we will get to is about a video called Dallas at a Crossroads, and we'll talk more about what that is here in a little bit, but I am going to attempt to show it on this TV. It is, I think, almost 20 minutes long, so hopefully you'll find it as interesting as I did. I thought it was worth the time to watch it. And then after that, we can discuss your observations and impressions and see what you guys think and how you react to this video. So hopefully the sound will be loud enough you can hear it. You may have to scrunch up for a few minutes, but I think it'll work. So in chapter 17, we are setting the scene with a guy named Stanley Marcus. You may have heard of him, right? So there's this store, Neiman Marcus. They sell very nice ties, and Stanley Marcus is one of the founders. You know, as I read this book, and the more I read about Stanley Marcus, in my view, he's kind of one of the heroes of the last 100 years of Dallas history. This guy was a progressive when it wasn't really cool to be a progressive. And he was definitely part of the in crowd, and he didn't seem to have much trouble telling his brethren in the business elite where they could go, as we will see in a moment. So keep in mind, this is in the 50s and 60s. We had the Red Scare with McCarthyism and all this kind of stuff going on. There was a movement in Dallas to remove what they called red art from the museums. And it's kind of funny as you how silly this is, but so someone had gone to Stanley Marcus, who was the president of the museum at the time, and said, "You got to take all this red art down." And he said, well, "I don't know what in the hell red art is." So he asked someone to show him, "What is this red art?" And they pulled up a few of the prints, and one of them was of a man hitting a baseball. The other one was a man fishing. And he looked at this and said, "How would anyone see this and know this is red art? Just because you think the artist might have some communist leanings, that doesn't make any sense. We're not going to remove them." And he said, as far as I'm concerned, you can tell them I said to go to hell. And as far as the museum is concerned, we can't cancel the show. So he took a stand in the face of McCarthyism, which, you know, my understanding from reading about it was a fairly serious ordeal back in the day. And good on him for doing so. But to really combat this, he didn't just say hell no. He did what a lot of people in Dallas do when you want to get something done. He went on a little road show around the city. He showed up at the editor of the Dallas Morning News house. He went to the Times-Herald editor's house. He met with them all privately. He ran around town, talked to all of the other titans of business, and put forth his position on this red art, and got the support of all of the powers that be around the city to keep this thing going. Now, I will note that in today's parlance, we would call these closed-door meetings, right? This would be a shadowy operation to try and keep red art in the museums, right? This is how we would paint this in a lot of circles in today. The moral of the story, I think, is everybody's okay with shadowy meetings as long as it pushes their side. So, you know, people should be allowed to have private phone calls and talk things out on occasion, but that's what he did. And so anyway, in response, there was some huge, there were actually pretty notable guys that were trying to get this thing out. They wanted this red art out of there. They were notable. Stanley Marcus wins at the end of the day. To add insult to injury, he goes around the country. He starts off with David Rockefeller and asks him for a picture that might be considered red art. And he, of course, agrees to loan this picture to the Dallas Museum. They send it down here. He does this with everyone else in the country, all these titans of business nationally. And then he also asks them to call all of their Dallas business contacts and asks them to go to the museum and make sure that the painting was hung right. And the message was clear: you guys idolize all these national business people. You want Dallas to be what they are. They are not the assholes that you are. So let's try and learn some lessons. And I thought it was a fairly good tactical move on his part to really change some hearts and minds. In chapter 18, the Dallas Morning News suggests that non-compliance with the desegregation orders is inevitable. And it's amazing as we read through the next couple of chapters, there are several editorial comments from the Dallas Morning News that you kind of read and cringe. I think, holy shit, I can't believe people actually thought that way, but they did. And the quote was, "After all, segregation of races throughout the world is largely individual choice, not by law. The court ruling for abandonment of legal separation has shocked Southern whites, yet its implications aren't nearly as great as might appear on the surface. Actually, the decision stands or falls on acceptance by the public. If the people of the United States want to integrate at the local level, the court's opinion will survive. If they do not, there will be circumvention, and the probability is that the court will close its eyes." Essentially what they're saying there is, this is just a court. Who are they to tell us what to do? Or it was almost, who was the old president that, I think it was Adams or one of the first guys that said, you can tell the court to just send their army right on over to the White House and make me do it. That kind of a thing. We still see this kind of stuff today, right? With modern Supreme Court holdings on gay marriage and all kinds of civil rights issues that we're dealing with today. You still see people saying, we'll see, right? We'll try and slow play this thing. But in 1956, desegregation began, kinda. The first to go were the buses. They went and pulled the signs down. We integrated the buses in April of 1956, and I think to the surprise of many, it actually went very smoothly. No issues. Everybody rode the bus. They went to work. They went home. It was a success. Everybody took a deep breath and a sigh of relief that there weren't these issues. Yes, Dan?
Just in that time frame, to add a little bit more detail, two schools opened up that were brand new. One was named after John B. Hood, Confederate general. Another was named after Albert Sidney Johnston.
You want to say to the mic?
Yeah, yes, please.
So everyone can hear it? And I think this is important and relevant.
In about 1956, I think it was 1956 or 1955, Dallas ISD opened 4 new schools, and 2 of them were named after Confederate generals. That was John B. Hood Middle School and Albert Sidney Johnson Elementary School.
Thank you, Dan. Those who don't know, Dan is one of our DISD trustees. And if you're reading the paper, you'll know that we are now considering not only the removal of Confederate monuments in Dallas, but we're also considering changing some of the school names. It's a fairly controversial topic, one for which I am clearly in the camp of take them down and change the damn names. And I think this is a perfect example in history of why we should do that. In 1956, you look at what's going on. We're in the middle of desegregation of schools, of busing, of restaurants, of businesses. It's a huge fight, and what does the white leadership do? They go put up a bunch of Confederate monuments and name schools after Confederate generals as a sign to say, not today, guys, we're still in control. And we shouldn't have monuments to that kind of activity. I just think they should come down. Just my personal thoughts, not the thoughts of anyone else here, except for probably most of you. All right. Chapter 19. We go back to the churches. Reverend Earl Anderson of Munger Place Baptist Church was actively calling for 20,000 white people that were openly committed to the principle of purity of the races. He also said Negroes believe mixing race is disobedient to the Word of God. The big concern back then was interracial sex and marriage. But there was an interesting comment by, I think it was Zan Holmes at the time, responded and said, we just want to be your brothers, not your brothers-in-law. Okay? So cool it. Reverend P.O. Young was a young pastor, a black man. He bought a house in Oak Cliff. As he was moving his stuff into the house, all of the neighbors gathered in the yard. They taunted him. They said, why are you moving here? You must have made a mistake. It got tense. He called the police. The police showed up, eventually agreed that it was getting a little tense. And this poor guy packed up his bags and left town, right? He went back to his old house and said, I don't want to live where I'm not wanted. He issued a statement essentially saying that he was not going to cause any trouble. He didn't want to be a martyr for this cause. Well, as you might imagine, that royally pissed off some of the black leadership who thought this is a fight that we should all be in, and we can't take these passive approaches. If there's going to be discrimination, we need to fight it at all costs. Roy Wilkins was with the NAACP. He gave a speech in a church about passive blacks and their spineless attitudes, who refused to stand up and be counted on the side of freedom. Interestingly, during that speech, no one from DISD was in the building, and I'm talking about the parishioners at the church that worked for DISD, didn't show up for church that day because W.T. White, you may have heard of, there's a school in North Dallas named after him. He was the superintendent of DISD at the time, and it was known, or at least thought, and probably known, that any employees of DISD that were participating in NAACP activities would be fired from the school district. So they did not show up. As another example of that, there was a pastor preaching, and he was moving along in his sermon. He starts to get into some issues about the NAACP and race relations. He was interrupted by someone in the crowd that said, hey, pastor, if you keep talking about that, a lot of us are going to have to leave because we can't be here for that or we'll lose our jobs. So the racism obviously is a real thing. It certainly was back then, it still is today. It just takes on a different form. Chapter 20. You might recall from previous chapters that we had formed something called the Biracial Committee, right? This was the idea of the Citizens Council to form a committee of white people and black people to go meet regularly and talk it out and try and figure out what are the solutions to our race issues. Essentially, it was a forum to negotiate a deal, right? This is the whole name of the book, The Accommodation. And this committee was charged with negotiating this accommodation to keep everyone at bay, as long as we keep the black leaders happy enough with some type of negotiated compromise, they won't lead the people into the streets and we can avoid riots. That was the whole line of thinking. Around this time, there was a lot of stress on the Biracial Committee, who had now become known as the Committee of 14. The 7 black members were getting a lot of pressure from their community, saying that they were part of the problem. They were negotiating these deals that weren't really good for black people in Dallas. All they were good for was maintaining order. I don't know if you saw on Facebook, I posted recently a comment, or it was an excerpt from Martin Luther King's jailhouse letters, and I thought that it was an interesting and relevant comment to today, where he said, our biggest adversaries are really not the KKKers. They're really not the White Citizens Council guys. It's not these leaders and icons of business that want to actively discriminate against us. Our biggest enemies are really the white moderates who value order over justice. And as we're in the middle of this debate right now on Confederate monuments, I think this is very relevant. We've got a lot of people that say, I don't want to say anything, it's too controversial, I don't want to get involved. But I think this is one of those topics where we all have to get involved when we're talking about race relations in Dallas. And you got to ask yourself, do you really value order over justice? What's the right thing to do? In any case, one of the members of the biracial committee went out into the public and tried to encourage people to boycott stores downtown. They wanted to do sit-ins, all kinds of things like this. There was another pastor in South Dallas named Brett James who objected not to the substance of the statement. What he objected to was that this guy was now trying to encourage people to go do the sit-ins and boycotts. And he said, you know, we've been doing that for months. Where have you been? Now all of a sudden you're getting pressure from your community because you're not really representing us, you're representing white Dallas's interest in accommodating us, and now you want us to respect you, and so you're going to try and join our team. We'll get the hell out of here. And so I think that's exactly what happened. I think he was booted from the black leadership in South Dallas. In chapter 21, Jim goes on, he talks about things not happening in Dallas just to set the stage for the national conversation that was definitely influencing what was happening in Dallas. And he talks about the Freedom Riders, who most of us have heard about, that bust themselves from the north down through the south, registering voters, trying to encourage people to participate in politics, certainly raising a bit of a ruckus in the name of getting some good press to encourage other people around the country to support the civil rights movement. Obviously, it was tense. In Alabama, the governor said, I cannot guarantee protection for this bunch of rabble-rousers. Essentially, everyone knew that they were a target for violence, and the white leaders in the South said, we're not going to stop anybody from hurting, you probably shouldn't come. When they arrived in Birmingham, Alabama, and as they got off the bus, they were violently attacked. One man's leg was broken. There was all kinds of bad things happening. The police chief, after the fact, came out and said, I knew that there was going to be some violence. All my men were just really busy, and so we couldn't send anyone to stop it. Right, which is clear. I don't think you have to read too far between the lines to understand the meaning of that statement. But throughout this whole ordeal, even the Kennedys, they had sent a liaison down to Birmingham that was watching this. He got yanked out of his car in the riot. He was beaten to unconsciousness and left in the street. There was all kinds of things happening. So you had the Kennedys, who were supporting the civil rights movement at the time. They're trying to intervene in some of these southern atrocities on race. And yet we're here still having riots. Now the leaders in Dallas saw all this stuff around the country and they said, we don't want any of that to happen here. That was the goal. And thus it is my notes when I turn to Linda's notes, which are significantly more thorough. Thank you, Linda. All right. All right, chapter 22. In the summer of 1960, U.S. District Judge T. Whitfield Davison is the federal judge that's hearing all of these desegregation cases. He clearly has an agenda, and if you want to talk about activist judges, he certainly was being an activist for his position, which was that of segregation and racism. And he kept on issuing these opinions that would support segregation. The appeals courts kept kicking him back, and they got stronger and stronger in their language because they were just disgusted with this guy and what he was doing. So he writes an opinion, and he goes through and he says a couple of things that we've highlighted here. The black people must have been happy to be released from the terrible slave ships that had brought them, meaning that their lives as slaves was at least better than being on a slave ship, so they should have been pretty happy about that. The Yankees, who didn't know how to handle Africans, came down and spoiled everything with emancipation. These are things that this federal judge actually said. And this was in 1960. Who here was alive in 1960? Right? Whose parents were alive in 1960, right? Everybody, this is not ancient history, right? This is just the other day. This is how our leadership, a federal judge, thought. And he was brazen enough to say it publicly. He also said that the reaction of black people to their emancipation was to weep because they were parting from someone they loved. How effective white Texans were during the tragic era, which was Reconstruction, at using terror to control blacks. He noted that the wave of sex between black and white people brought on by desegregation will be so obnoxious to decent people that they will vacate a large portion of the nation. Right, we still hear that today. If you guys do that, I'm leaving the country. It happens on all sides. Yes, sir, Larry.
Can you his name again, the judge?
It was a really pretentious name.
Beauregard something?
No, Davidson was his, yes, his T. Whitfield Davidson. All right, anyway, he said a whole bunch of really bad stuff, obviously, right? So this was part of the problem. Finally, the appeals court forced him to order desegregation in DISD the following year. He noted in his opinion, giving the order, that this was not an expression of his own will, because he thought the principle of desegregation was, quote, un-American. All right, way to go, Dallas. Chapter 23, and here's where we get to this video that was up there a second ago. Hopefully I can figure this out. Technology is not my thing a lot of times, but we're going to give this a shot. So the story is, around this time, as we're watching all of these riots go around the country, Dallas leadership looked at this and said, we don't want any of that stuff to happen here. So they published this video that we're about to watch.
It's a film.
Say what?
It's a film.
Oh, a film. I'm sorry. A film. Sorry, it's my age and all.
Give us a class.
It's a problem.
What year is it? 61.
This is 61. And they sent this film around town, and they would actually take people out of their offices and bring them into the cafeteria in the building, and they would make all the employees watch these things. Remember, this is the types of business that have published this thing. And so they had all of their employees watch it. They had all of their friends and make their employees watch it. And hopefully I can figure this out here. Oh, I'll move it.
Are you putting it on?
Maybe. I hope.
You had it on earlier.
It went to
Screensaver?
yeah.
It says it's playing on the stage. I don't believe it. All right, talk amongst yourself for 1 second here. Let me figure this out.
No. Thank you.
Cast.
Thinking about it.
People are born in Dallas. Years that follow are filled with happiness and sadness. This is your city, Dallas. Dallas is a man-made town, and each man can find here an opportunity to make his life whatever he wants. We call our town Big D because it is big-hearted, open-handed, both friendly and progressive. Big D offers a place to work, to learn, to play, to worship. For each man to own his own castle and achieve his own goals. Dallas is the finest home on earth to raise a family. You work here. You have your home here. You raise your children here. Dallas lives and prospers through you, her people. The life of a city and her citizens are inseparable. With the passage of time, the faces of cities, like the faces of people, changed. We expect the face of Dallas to change. We just can't believe our city is perfect as it is. I remember Dallas 20, 40, 50 years ago. Why, just before I was born, Main Street was a sea of mud. I can remember standing for hours in front of the old Opera House to watch an Armistice Day parade. Guy Scavenger stands there today. I can remember when the horse and the mule were man's best friend. When to get to SMU was a Texas mile across the prairie. When the tallest buildings in town were the Medical Arts and the Magnolia buildings. Dallas has never stopped changing between then and now. Well, there have been lots of changes come over Dallas. Change is not always easy. As we change the face of Dallas, it is our responsibility to see that it is changed for the better. For what we have created, we can also destroy. April 2nd, 1958, the face of Dallas was changed through natural disaster. A tornado appeared out of the blue, and for 40 minutes, Dallasites watched it ravage their city. Dallas was helpless to stop is not alone in facing changes of nature or of man, past and future, which affect the city and its character. Other cities have faced and faced recently the same problems of change which Dallas now faces. They have met these problems with violence. The face of violence is the face of hate, unreason, cruelty, personal and civic irresponsibility. Their actions and the results speak in these films for themselves. Is the face of fear, bewilderment, suffering, physical and mental. This face can be a child's face, your child's face. Part 2. Can be a child's face, your child's face. That children are the most deeply affected persons in times of disharmony and strife is borne out by the Dallas County Medical Society, whose spokesman is Dr. P.E. Lukey, Jr.
We wouldn't knowingly hurt or frighten a child. And yet, as we have seen, violence does frighten children. They become uncertain and insecure. When children are frightened and insecure, they look to their parents or those they love and respect for reassurance and guidance. We know from our wartime studies that children can go through bombings, moving, cold, and hunger without any lasting effects if their parents were there. On the other hand, children taken from their parents and moved to safer places often became disturbed. Thus we see that violence frightens children. The pain, anger, hysteria, and fear is disturbing to them. They look to their parents or loved ones for support. If these parents represent violence or condone violence, then the children become very upset and disturbed. Disturbed children are sick children. They may not look sick or act sick, but they are sick.
Medicine explains the child's need for security. Society must meet these needs and does so through the law by which we live. From the County Court of Judge Julian Hyder, Dean J.W. Ream of the Southern Methodist University Law School defines the law.
The law is a system where the unfortunate stand as peer and equal with the most privileged. A court is a vehicle tested and refined over generations, where two people equally sure of their morality can bring their disputes, and dispositions can be made based on the facts and the law of their conflict, so that each might continue to enjoy his rights and live together in the community with a mutual respect for each other's position. Here, the rules of organized society function.
I'm Ralph Hartman, member of the Dallas Bar Association. I meet my opponent in court here within these walls where disputes are settled between our clients. I'm entitled to bring witnesses and to cross-examine my opponent's witnesses. This is where the witness sits as he tells his facts to the jury. This is the jury where they sit as they listen to the facts. My client's opponent also is represented by a lawyer.
I am Tom Hartnett. I am also a member of the Dallas Bar Association. This is where we lawyers sit. We prosecute, we defend, we argue before a judge elected by the people to stand impartially between myself and my opponent. The witnesses, who are laymen, bring facts to the jury, who are laymen. The jury determines the facts. His Honor, the judge, then applies the law to the facts in rendering the decision. Violence cannot change a decision rendered within these walls.
Once a decision has been made, it is the law. On April 6th of this year, the federal court decision became final that some degree of desegregation must by law begin in Dallas in the schools this fall. In spite of arguments, in spite of criticisms, in spite of personalities, the law is the law. Disagreement or dissatisfaction with any law should not and it must not be expressed by citizens in violence. In a democracy, there are always legal channels open to those who would prefer to change the law. These are the methods which a good citizen uses, not brickbats and stones.
On these principles, Dallas stands. On these principles, the leadership of Dallas is firm. Through the Bar Association, the Medical Society, the Council of Churches, the Labor Council, from its elected officials and its newspapers, Dallas has found many voices, but with a single message.
Dallas is a good city, and we want to keep it that way. We need all of our citizens to accept their civic and their personal responsibilities, and to stand up and be counted for law and order. We need your help. As your mayor, and speaking for your city council, we pledge our assistance in this program, and earnestly hope to have yours. Together, we will show America the Dallas way.
All right, this is the last part of it right here. It gets worse, folks.
This way.
Basically, the responsibility for our children's behavior lies with us, their parents. If your child is to respect the law and act as a good citizen, he must be able to follow your example. You must be a good citizen. As a representative of 30,000 Dallas laboring people, I am instructed by our membership to make it very clear and certain where we stand. Labor recognizes its responsibility to all Dallas citizens and the community as a whole. We highly value active, good citizenship and recognize fully the great influence that our city's good name has on job opportunity and a prosperous economy. We understand that the maintenance of civil peace is necessary if Dallas is to keep her good name. Dallas is indeed a good place to live, to work, and to raise our families. You can count on the labor force to keep it so.
The editorial policy of the Dallas News is to develop an atmosphere of nonviolence. Nothing is gained by lawlessness. But a newspaper can do just so much. It can tell the people which way the cat is going to jump and hope that the people will take care of the cat. So each of you is an editorial editor, and in your words and actions you help create a public atmosphere of calm in this trying period. Remember, the pressure of public opinion is like the atmosphere, 16 pounds to the square inch. All of us are in this boat together in the sense we all are opinion makers.
As a responsible newspaper, the Times Herald will not condone or tolerate impulsive actions of any individual
desegregation in our public schools. It is simple, it is just, it is realistic, it is mandatory. Our people must maintain unqualified respect for law and order.
Violence affects the whole community, just not a few isolated segments of the school or business public. Violence not only disrupts business and education, but undermines the health and morale fiber of all citizens. Extremist elements and self-seeking individuals come into control, and the city's children are forced to bear alone a burden which is rightfully an adult responsibility. Every citizen has the privilege to live his life according to his own views, so long as he acts within the law. In private areas not related to the law, it is the right and responsibility of each individual family to establish his own values and personal standards. The wise parent prepares his child to accept and adjust to the changed school situation, and at the same time establishes for his child values for private relationships. The person who resorts to violence is bad. Citizens who deserve the condemnation of his neighbors. He will be arrested as a lawbreaker. He will be deprived of the support and following of his neighbors. He will stand alone.
There have always been a few individuals in any city whose cure-all for any problem is to meet it with violence. In Dallas, these few individuals will stand alone. If they do so act, they will do so in the face of a community of hundreds of thousands of law-abiding citizens who know that the problem of growth, of customs changed by law, however else met and solved, must be met and solved peacefully. In this knowledge, in the actions of good citizens acting in this certainty, the changing face of Dallas will remain unscarred.
Robbery, arson are crimes. Violence, civil disorder, riot are crimes equally punishable under the law. A law enforcement officer is obligated, regardless of personal opinion, to uphold the law and see that it is enforced. This will be done in Dallas. Every officer in the Dallas Police Department has been thoroughly trained in the techniques of handling unruly crowds. The officers will perform their sworn duty. They will protect the rights of all citizens and preserve peace and order in our community. The police will devote their energies to controlling those few who do not have the judgment and character to obey the law. We know who those few are.
You buying us around now?
I know, right? I had two observations when I watched that. Number one, somebody thought that was a good idea.
Looking back at our history is often ugly.
It is. Number two, I didn't realize that everyone talked funny in the 1960s. Apparently it was universal.
And there was no such thing as attitude.
No. It was a lot. What did you guys? What were your reactions to that video? Anybody have a thought other than how crazy it was? But yes.
I didn't see any people of color in that.
I didn't either. All white folks. I don't think there are any women either. Yes, Linda.
You really don't know what the film's about until the end, when with Ted Dealey and the Times Herald editor actually say the word desegregation.
Yeah.
So
Hey, Lauren,
yeah.
is the camera back in wide frame? Okay, just check. Sorry. Jim?
There's a very strong undertone of you better not challenge the status quo, and to the extent the city's going to change, the people in control will manage that change and don't get in our way.
You know, there's a debate on this, I think, and I think clearly that's the message. The debate is on who is the target of the message. In the accommodation, Jim asserts that this was a clear message to the black community to follow the rules or there was going to be trouble. I got to be honest with you, when I watched this the first time, I didn't see that at all. This to me looked like a very clear message to white people to say, you better keep your shit in line. We don't want any trouble here. We're going to hold you all to account for it. So I don't know if anyone has a different take. Yes, sir?
I was struck by how much of it was about image and the image of Dallas to the rest of the country. And we moved here in 1971 when I was in high school, and I was struck by how image conscious Dallas was at the time. And I wondered if that was because of the Kennedy assassination and what people thought of Dallas as a result of the assassination. But as a result of this, well, I saw it on YouTube and also reading the book, it became apparent to me that Dallas has just been image conscious to a weird degree for a long time.
I think that's probably accurate. It's like when you watch your big brother be very successful and you haven't quite gotten there yet. But, yes, Mark.
I've got a comment on the tail of that. I have a theory that, well, it's not my theory, that the soul of a city, the personality of every city is reflected in its architecture. In Dallas, the single most prevalent building material is reflective glass. We don't have an image. We're trying to capture an image of something else, and it becomes nothing but a hall of mirrors.
That is an interesting observation. I had not heard that before. Did you have a comment over here? Is that you? Tammy, is that you?
It is.
Okay, I can see. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, guys. So you made a comment earlier about you think that the video was made for the white citizens of Dallas, but it depends on where it was shown.
And I agree with that. And if you read the histories, if someone has something to add to this, correct or wrong, but the thing was actually shown in employers' cafeterias and things, which typically by white employers to white employees. And so, you know, as we know through the first two sections of this book, you know, most of the black community didn't really have opportunities to go work in these factories. They didn't have these kind of jobs where they were there. And I don't think they were having movie theaters or anything either that were, you know, showing this thing. So my take on it was targeted to the white people. Say, we don't want you, we're in desegregation. We're going to be enrolling black children into white schools. Don't line up on the streets and throw and spit and do the stuff that we're doing in other cities. Just stay home and be quiet.
Yeah, and so the second part of that I was going to say is, what struck me about this is it's propaganda.
Clearly.
But we have the same type of propaganda today.
You know, I agree. I don't know that as I look at this, that I view this as negative propaganda. I mean, to me, if you're sending a message out to white people that says, don't be assholes, just stay quiet, I don't that doesn't seem like a nefarious, evil intent to me. I kind of see that as responsible government. So, I mean, I differ with Jim on this chapter of the book, where I think he tries to portray this as, you know, some kind of nefarious undertone. I don't see that at all here. I see this as Dallas leadership saying we don't want to have a riot, which, I mean, that doesn't sound horrible to me. And we're going to go talk to our people, the white people, and tell them to behave. Because throughout the country, they were the instigators. It wasn't the black people starting the riots in schools during desegregation. It was white people. Yes, sir.
The origin of this division between left and right, this broad division between priorities of those who identify themselves on the left and those who identify themselves to be on the right. It always baffled me. I mean, the expression political correctness came up. It baffled me. It actually, initially, I thought that was funny. It was like on my side, we all on where I identify as myself as on the left, and I thought that it was comical to observe that so many things the independent thinkers, as we prided ourselves to be, we nevertheless agreed on a great many tenets, and so that the pattern is for years. I've wondered why. What is it that the glue that holds together these two polar extremes? And it's been pointed out that when values are ranked among those who identify as themselves on the left and those on the right, the value that's ascendant on the left is justice, and the value that's ascendant on the right is order. And this film is all about maintaining order. And it seems, so I agree with you completely that the audience seems to be, the message seems to be directed toward those who value order. And it's a message sort of that says, your father has spoken. The Supreme Court has determined what the law is, and that's the end of the discussion. So no violence because, right, he says, not because, it doesn't say daddy's right, it says daddy's spoken.
Teresa, did you ever come in earlier? No? You gave up? Okay. That's fine. Now, I don't want to be too kind. Oh, do you have a comment right here? Yes. I'm sorry.
So, what I'm wondering is that video juxtaposed with the idea in the reading of sort of and I'm forgetting the exact language here, but like the whole of Dallas, or what was the language? Can you give me the mic? Oh, sorry.
Here you go.
So what I'm wondering is that video juxtaposed with, within the reading, we see something regarding the whole of Dallas, or how am I saying it wrong? What's the word?
Dallas as a whole.
Dallas as a whole, thank you. So Dallas as a whole versus or adjacent or resonant with that video, do you or anyone else have any thoughts on that? I'm just
He actually said it in the video. He said community as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Right, but
David
there
used
wasn't
that language.
a lot of that language, and so I'm just wondering.
So here's my thought on this, again, because I will offer it anytime you want to hear it. The real answer, as it always is balance. You've got macro issues in the city, and you've got micro issues in the city. Most of the people that were putting this video out are concerned about the macro issues. When they say this is Dallas as a whole, they're looking at macro issues. What's the population that's coming into the city? How many jobs do we have? What's our homelessness rate? These types of issues are in some ways macro issues, and that's what they're trying to manage. The problem is the micro world that they live in today's world, is, Highland Park and Preston Hollow and places like this, they don't have to deal with a lot of the micro problems that are being dealt with by other communities throughout the city. So when you say Dallas as a whole, that's not necessarily a bad thing inherently. The problem is you can't just consider Dallas as a whole to the exclusion of the communities that make up Dallas as a whole. And so what we need is our leaders to actually go out into these communities and not just think about the macro issues, but look at the micro issues that each community is dealing with and make sure that we're giving proper attention to those things so that we can work on things like affordable housing and the homelessness issues and all of these things, bringing economic development to South Dallas. So Dallas as a whole might be doing great, but pockets of Dallas are not doing great. And so I think that's the issue. So I don't want to frame it in a conspiracy type of term where Dallas as a whole is code for fuck all you guys, right? Because I don't think it is. I think it's a failure to recognize the micro issues, and that can be just as bad of a sin as some others. So anybody else want to respond to that? Everyone satisfied with that answer? Does anyone want to throw anything at me? I will try harder. Okay. All right, just a few more chapters to go, then we'll finish this thing up and get back to social hour where I think we all enjoy hanging out with each other. All right, chapter 24. In September of '61, we finally, and I air quote, desegregate DISD. This is 7 years after the Supreme Court ordered desegregation. So it's been quite a while. Jim talks about this idea, and I think it's actually a really good way to frame this, of real segregation versus tokenism. Right? We admit 2 black children into a white school, and we say that's now desegregated. Right? Well, that's a token desegregation. It's not real. You go to do the same example in the State Fair of Texas, right? Back in the day, we're going to desegregate the State Fair. Black people can now come in any day they want, but you still can't go in the Midway, you can't eat at the restaurants, and you can't go ride the rides where your black skin might touch somebody else's white skin. It's tokenism. Token desegregation is not desegregation. And these were the issues that we dealt with, and that is why in the 70s we had a lawsuit filed that we finally got out from under federal review in DISD in 2003. So it's been very recent, where they finally said, I don't know that they so much said you're desegregated as much as they said we give up. Is that fair? I mean, DISD's got what? It's less than 5% white students at this point, roughly 3 or 4%. 5, and they're kind of all congregating within just a couple of campuses, really. So I don't know how you fix that until we fix our society to the point that we don't have this white flight issue out to the suburbs, because that's the real issue, right? We are self-segregating in a lot of ways. So it's difficult to integrate schools when all the white people leave, which has been a big part of the problem. All right. As we do today, anybody that is a political opponent, we don't really stick with the substance of the issue. Personal ad hominem attacks are par for the course, right? These are effective tools, and they can be used, sometimes unethically. Back in the 60s, the attack was, you're a communist, right? The Dallas Morning News was publishing editorials about the communist blacks that are trying to overthrow our system of society. And anytime anyone said anything we don't like, that's because they're communists. It's an easy slam. It has nothing to do with the substance of the issue being argued. But if I can discredit you as an opponent, no one will listen to you anymore, and I win without having to actually have the real battle. This is still a thing we deal with in Dallas today. There are definitely sides to every political battle, and there are definitely a lot of ad hominem attacks that come out and try and demonize one group. That is one of my criticisms of this book, really, is it is a demonization of a group of people that did some really bad things, and they should be demonized for those things, but we have carried that into today, and no matter what you try and do, it's hung around your neck, demonized for it. So that's why I like doing these things right here. We all get people in a room with various persuasions of politics, we talk to each other, you figure out Mark Melton doesn't actually have horns, because I hide them, right? But anyway, it's these are good exercises where we can talk to each other, actually get down to the nuts and bolts of issues, and hopefully find some ways to resolve some of these things. In chapter 25, we get into a bunch of these Dallas Morning News editorials. They were presenting a consistent theme on this issue of communism and disruption in the black community. In 1963, the Dallas Morning News presented Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, which I referenced earlier, by sandwiching it on the editorial page between a long article about the Confederacy in segregation by the Chancellor of the University of Mississippi and a bold headline that said, "Commies and Negroes." That doesn't seem very unbiased, does it? There was actually a lot of terrified people. Obviously, we had JFK got shot. Even before that, though, people were afraid of the environment here in Dallas because it was so tense. LBJ and his wife were actually attacked and spat on by a group of Republican women in Dallas for pushing the Civil Rights Movement, or the Civil Rights Act, rather. Adlai Stevenson, who was the ambassador to the United Nations, was attacked in Dallas when a mob surrounded him and rocked his car. Because all of these people trying to push the civil rights thing were communists, and we need to get these people out of America. I'm sorry, America. All right, finally, chapter 26. It's the last one. Smile. We're almost there. Black people in Dallas took the murder of John F. Kennedy as a direct affront to them. He was fighting for the civil rights in whatever way that he did. And when he was murdered, Eddie Radish Johnson was quoted as saying, "Just before the assassination, it seemed to me no matter how hard we tried, there was such prevailing hatred of black people in Dallas. It was depressing. When the assassination came, I took it personally. The president was killed because he was trying to make us equal." Well, this is all part of the history of Dallas, right? Now, obviously, I have not studied JFK because there's just too many unknowns. I have no idea what really happened, what the reasons were, so I won't opine on that. Following the Kennedy assassination, we have some other comments from some black pastors. Zan Holmes was then a 29-year-old pastor in a Hamilton Park Methodist church. He told a racially mixed audience in a suburban Richardson meeting that black Americans wanted justice, not sex with white people. This was the comment where he said, "We just want to be your brothers, not your brother-in-law. Everyone calm down." These were major concerns of white people in the 60s, and everything seemed to be a problem. It was one of those issues where you resolve one issue, and then somebody comes up with another issue, and you resolve that when they come up with another issue. And the fact is, they really just don't want to do this thing. They're just making excuses. The St. Paul Methodist Church pastor in 1964 angrily denounced student demonstrations at the all-black Houston Tillotson College in Austin. And he said, even though they were misguided by a white faculty member, the local NAACP, and a few transient freedom riders, the administration and their parents have a right to expect them to think. The depth of ingratitude for any students who are recipients of scholarships and other financial aid to demonstrate against their school when they know they are biting the very hand which is feeding them. Now that passage struck me particularly because in the last probably 2 months, someone made that argument to me about Confederate monuments on college campuses. Specifically on East Coast Ivy League college campuses. And this was a wealthy white guy, as you might guess. And he said to me, "I don't understand why all these minority kids are complaining about this stuff. They're getting a free ride when I'm having to write a check for the full tuition. Why can't they just appreciate the gift that they've been given and move on with their lives?" So this little comment right here from 1964 is still being said in 2017. So keep that in mind. Especially white people. You're out there talking to people and you go, "Well, why are black people so pissed off?" Ask them. They'll tell you, and just shut up and listen. There's some good reasons. Last comment. The Dallas Morning News introduced a series that attempted to discover what was in the minds of black people. Right, that was a good segue, right? Okay. So they introduced this columnist who is supposed to be a black guy. We don't really know. Here is a quote, you tell me. "The Negro is a hard animal to understand. He has been down so long he does not know how to act in association with whites. He is profane, a sure sign of weakness of character. He talks too loud. These are some of the reasons he has not been accepted. Often he seeks his rights but forgets his responsibilities of full citizenship." That was printed in the Dallas Morning News. in 1964. Anyway, there's some other stuff about some violent attacks. It doesn't matter. They happen. Any comments? A hush covers the crowd. Larry?
Yeah, watching that, listening, my first instinct is that it's self-caricature, and yet it's stuff that I've heard within months or years of now. It's sad and it's crazy, but let's go back to 11/22/63. The ads and the editorials that the snooze had published, and the first reaction was, I don't know, the president is dead. It's how's Dallas gonna look? It's PR dementia.
There certainly is that. I kind of view it as a sideline issue. You know, the vanity of Dallas, I don't really give a shit. Until it starts impacting policy. So from my perspective, and I think it did impact
But
policy.
it's so ingrained.
It is, and I think it's one of those things where self-reflection is so important. You've got to know thyself, right? Understand the psychology of the city and the history and the leaders and yourself, so that as we're analyzing these policies, we can hopefully be a little bit more objective about how we're making these decisions that we're going to live with going forward. So any other comments before we wrap it up and return to the bar for shots for Linda? Yes.
I just want to piggyback on what Larry said, was that the Dallas Morning News was sort of this driving force of anti-Black, anti-Kennedy sentiment prior to his assassination. And that connection between how the Black, or this is at least presented in the book, how the Black community related to the Kennedys because of how they supported civil rights and the Freedom Riders, and how they were connected. The Black community and the Kennedys were connected, and how the white establishment looked at those two together and then, created this city of hate. This environment for Kennedy to be assassinated, and then the environment for the white establishment to turn on the Black community because of their the way the Black community viewed JFK. Anyway, I thought that's what I got from a lot of the chapters here, and how the Dallas Morning News really drove that anti-Kennedy, anti-Black sentiment. So that was just an observation.
Good observation. Erica?
In the 1960s, I went to Thomas Jefferson High School, and our mascot was the rebel flag that they would go up and down the field with, and our theme song was Dixie. And
Did you guys hear that?
71.
What year was that?
That was at Thomas Jefferson High School. Our theme song was Dixie with the...
Her theme song at Thomas Jefferson High School was Dixie. That was the school song. And their mascot carried a Confederate flag.
Right, and they would go back and forth, and so in 1971, after I graduated, the new group came and started walkouts and stuff, and they changed it, but the kids that were involved with it had bombs underneath their houses. I put it on Facebook yesterday. So they were threatened, and they were with violence, but they were able to change it to the Patriots. Although there's still some schools around Dallas, I think in Fort Worth, that have it changed. But when people say, "Where is this coming from? How come we're just hearing about it?" Well, it's been going on for that. I graduated 45 years. Was it 45 years ago?
No one knew the math. It's rude.
And so, this has been going on forever. And we had, I think in high school, we had maybe 4 Black kids, and there was no problem that I knew of. But apparently there was a lot of problems, that was going on. So I just kind of want to remind people that this is something that's been going on still up until today.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I think that's important. That just because racism is driven underground doesn't mean that it's gone. Right? In 1960s, you could talk about it openly and no one cared. In 2017, it's not quite so politically correct, as you pointed out, to share your true feelings about racism. But you know, especially the white people in the room, who here has gone to a Thanksgiving dinner and had never in your life had your crazy racist redneck uncle make some very inappropriate comments? Has anyone gone their entire life and not had that experience?
We're all Democrats.
You're all Democrat. I'm from Oklahoma, okay, so it's very different. Right? Racism is still a very, 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 very real thing in America. It's just a little quieter. And so where's it coming from now? Now it's finally coming from, I think, a lot of people getting together and deciding that this is not acceptable anymore. And people are pointing to it and trying to make some improvements to fix it. And so, and I think this has definitely pissed off a lot of the old racist guard that has said, we were happy to be underground and quiet. Why are you calling us out now? But it needs to happen. Tammy, Jim, other comment?
Yeah, so biggest takeaway for me is, as you were kind of closing out, from the notes there, everything that you just pointed out from what you read in these last couple of chapters, it could be today. So, everything that you just mentioned is still happening today here in Dallas. So I think the opportunity is that everyone in here recognizes that what's happening today, as it was happening back in 1960, 1961, is not right.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. Jim, you get the last word.
It's saying something you said made me think of this concept of when somebody has power and they lose it, they don't go away. They just stay quiet and bide time until they see an opening to make a move to get their power back. And I think that's what we're seeing now, as people think that they have a voice and sponsor. They feel empowered to make a move to get it back. So what that tells me is, in fights that are important, when you get the upper hand, that doesn't mean you're done. That means that you now have control. And now the onus is upon you to make sure that that viewpoint and that vision is now instilled widely so that it becomes part of the ethos of your community.
And I agree with that. I think it takes people actually pointing these problems out on their own teams. There was one of the stories we didn't really get into about Stanley Marcus. You know, he would go to the Citizens Council, and one of his comments was, we all have a role to play, and I'm paraphrasing this badly, but you know, we all have this role to play in social progress, and he felt like his role was to be an insurgent from the inside. To be the guy that was part of the club that would sit at the table and go, you guys are all being dickheads right now, can you stop? Right, and so I think for those of you that are involved in these groups, and I put myself in that box as well, that is part of the role. It's to change these organizations from the inside out. That doesn't mean that it's not extraordinarily helpful in moving that process forward, to have people from the outside yelling in, also saying, stop being assholes, right? We need a unified voice in this from all sides, but I think eventually, at least I hope we will get there. But anyway, I'm going to close it out. Larry, sorry. I already said, I can see people looking at me like, shut up and get off the stage. And that's fine, it's fair. It's hot up here, I'm ready to get off the stage. So I will meet you guys at the bar here in a second. Again, thank you guys for coming out to installment 3. We will have the final installment of the Accommodation next Tuesday night at 7 o'clock here. After that, I think people are enjoying this, and so we will probably do this again with a different book. It turns out there are quite a few books on the racial history of Dallas. And so I think the next one we will do will be White Metropolis. So go ahead and start now trying to find your copy. I bought it on Amazon for like $7, so it's pretty easy. White Metropolis. Anyway, thanks again for coming, and I'll see you right over there.